I would like to welcome Tim Buckley and Joan Marcante of Vanguard to the virtual stage. Tim, John, welcome. So nice to see you both. It's great to speak with you.
Our pleasure to be here.
Great to see you, Peter.
Thank you. Well, Tim Buckley is the chairman and chief executive officer of Vanguard, only the fourth in the company's history, and somebody who has held many roles in the organization, including two CIO roles, the chief investment officer, but also the chief information officer role prior to ascending to his current post. John Marconte, actually likewise, was at GE for a time, but a longtime executive now at Vanguard. And the same can be said to him in terms of the diversity of roles and responsibilities that he has, as Vanguard is one of these remarkable talent factories that values T-shaped careers. That is to say, getting depth in certain disciplines, but also breadth across the organization, such that when one has chief in their title, they've moved around the organization to an extent that they really understand how value is created. Tim, I'd like to begin with you, if you don't mind. So I mentioned this career path that you have had, an unusual one, maybe not quite unique, but unusual, let's say, at least a rare pathway to the top of an organization. I wonder if you could take a moment and reflect on, generally speaking, what having a variety of roles prior to assuming the chairman and CEO post did for you. And if you wouldn't mind, due to our audience, lingering a moment on the chief information officer role and what you draw upon there, that would be particularly appreciated.
Yeah, happy to, Peter, and thanks for the time. And it's a pleasure to be here with John to have this conversation. Peter, you already hit on the fact that, I think if you looked at the exact roles I had, that's a unique path, and I don't think anyone will have that path again. But rotating is very common at Vanguard, and especially if you think about business and IT. And if you step back, it's because it's really at the intersection of technical innovation and client need or customer need. That's where you truly shape a business. You think about, when we think about the cloud by itself cannot create better investment returns. AI isn't going to make us any better at advice by itself. It's how our crew leverage those technologies, leverage them to drive value for our clients. So one of the things that John and I will emphasize is, hey, we have to drink deeply in both disciplines. You can't just know one. You've got to drink deeply in IT, and you've got to drink deeply in the business. So IT experts, they're expected to know the business challenges. And the business leaders don't get it off either. They have to go deep on the technology. And we see it, if you think about things like, you always hear terms like, what's your data strategy? Well, you better know the business context for it. Robotics. You can talk about robotics, but you better understand the client journey you're applying them to. You think about things like machine learning. Say well, what strong hypothesis are you starting with that you're going to iterate from? What are you trying to solve for in there? And this is where you need both sides of the knowledge. If you only have half the story, you end up with a lot of waste. So how do we solve for that? Well, that's the pitfall for so many companies, is you only have half the story. Everyone talks about that tight IT and business integration. We take it that one step further, Peter, by rotating. You talked about my rotations. You talked about John's rotations. What does it do for you? It gives you better context. You can ask better questions. Once you have the context, you have the competencies, you have the understanding from that rotation. So you actually understand. For me, if I think about conversations around IT, now I'm dated, Peter. All right, so hey, I was the CIO in 2006. They were done with me, right? And so I moved on to run our retail business. But I still truly respect the discipline. And I know the challenges that the IT teams face. I have an idea of what might be hype and what might be reality when the new technologies roll out. And I know how quickly those technologies change. I know what the learning curve looks like. And so for John and I, when we have discussions, we can really, from each other's perspectives, I can understand, okay, how is he trying to roll out new technology? What's it like to drive change within IT? And he's led one of our biggest businesses, one of our biggest business functions. He knows how to get the business people on board and embracing the IT side. So we can dive into solutions a lot more than maybe most CEO and CIOs can in a given one-on-one. But John, I'll welcome you to correct me on that one, but I think we can go pretty deep in the one-on-ones.
And I just, even in your response there, Tim, clearly you know technology better than the average chairman and CEO. And John, I'm sure that is a tremendous blessing, but also you know that you can't sort of hide the details.
There's no hiding. There's no hiding details. There's no hiding details.
Peter, he may have to re-educate me a little bit and say times have changed him. Yeah,
but it's good. But there's no pulling the wool over Tim's eyes, and I think that's that. But it's a huge blessing to have a chairman and, frankly, an executive team that is knowledgeable and passionate about technology.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. So clearly, as we're hearing from Tim, and I know from our past conversations, John, representative of a broader level of engagement across the entire leadership team in terms of technology. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you and your peers collaborate on strategic IT investments.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. I have about 3 thoughts on this. Tim already covered one of them. But first, let me start with the tone at the top really does matter. And Tim kind of sets the tone, and it's not an IT plan. It's a enterprise technology strategy that is enabling our businesses. And, Tim's really good at holding people accountable for their business plans, but more importantly, holding them accountable for their technology plans. And I think that really matters. So one is, hey, the tone at the top really does matter. The second, I think, Peter, like team culture matters too. There is a shared sense of responsibility and accountability at the senior staff or the individuals that report to Tim that have the obligation and responsibility and honor of running the company. There's a shared sense of responsibility. There's been many times where someone around that table will sacrifice their capital or their best talent in order to put the company first, in order to lower one of their priorities for an enterprise priority. And if you want a culture like that, one of the things Tim has done and done really well is asked senior staff, all of his directs, to work together to produce every year, a common set of goals, enterprise goals. And then we hold each other accountable for that, and he holds us accountable for that. And I think that's a big thing. And last thing I'll say, that the fun thing about the rotational nature is that, wow, if it's rotational, you never really know where you're going to end up. So it's kind of your vested interest is to run the company as an enterprise. And Tim mentioned this too. The final point is, strategy and technology are so intertwined today. Technology is the disruptor of our time, no doubt. Technology leaders have to be passionate about the business, but business leaders have to be tech savvy. They don't have to be developers, but they certainly have to know how technology enables their business.
Yeah, great points, John. Thank you. John, I want to stick with you for a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Vanguard's adopted an agile way of working across the enterprise. And I wonder if how this expanded from an IT-based initiative to something that the entire company could use.
Yeah, I think Tim will have some comments on this too. But clearly, if I summarize, I look back at our journey. We as a team, an executive team, we spent quite a few trips going out looking at competition, but also looking, at West Coast, looking at startups. And one of the things early on that we were enamored with was, how people were working and the speed by which they were getting things done. And then I would say after that, we committed to a digital transformation, Peter. Like we committed to adopting agile, adopting cloud computing, empowering cross-functional teams. Tim mentioned this, both product and journey teams, to test and learn, be quick. And we coined that early on, business value at startup speed. The accelerator for us, I think, from an enterprise standpoint, is that we then rolled out Lean in our largest operations, our retail operations group, with amazing results for productivity and amazing results for engagement, employee engagement. And we really got momentum when Tim made this the agenda across the company, something we now call new ways of working. So no matter where you go in the company today, you can go into marketing as an example, and there's marketing agile pods, and they are focused on outcomes for each of the campaigns. So agile pods, even in marketing, in HR, we're really changing the way we work across the enterprise. And I think that's kind of the history.
Got it. I appreciate that perspective. Tim, John alluded to this new way of working, and I wonder if you can reflect on some of the biggest challenges to making that shift happen.
Well, look, first credit to John for changing how the whole company works. He had business value at startup speed. We're not the best at naming things here. So we said, hey, this is a new way of working. And so the whole thing ended up with this acronym called NWOW. We were supposed to actually rename it, but it's just called New Ways of Working, which is the best of lean and agile, et cetera, et cetera. And look, there have been some challenges because it is, and you're talking about change management. You're wholly changing how business and IT people function. And if you go back, think about the old way we used to lead and the old way things used to get done. You'd have the traditional projects. You'd prioritize them as a senior team, what's most important to the client, to the business. And then you'd list them out. Okay, now let's get them done. And we're going to measure them by, time, scope, and money. And if you hit time, scope, and money, you're successful. Well, we didn't talk anything about the outcome, but hey, that was the outcome. And then we've turned that on its head where it's not bosses telling you what to do, how to do it, and monitoring it. It's now our crew, what we call our employees, our crew actually own a client experience. So they own, maybe it's moving money to Vanguard, maybe it's opening an account. They own that experience. And they're the ones that get to decide on a daily basis how to enhance it, how to change it. What we do as leaders is we set the goals. So what are the outcomes we're looking for? And they get to decide how to optimize around those outcomes. So what's the wholesale shift? It's uncomfortable. First, leaders have to be comfortable with, you're going to set the goal. You can't micromanage the activity. Your job is actually now to knock down obstacles, not to dictate what gets done and what doesn't get done. Now, well, that sounds good for the crew, but for the crew owning a process, they now have to accept accountability. And they're making the changes. If they don't hit the goal, they have to embrace failure. And that's when the toughest part is. A lot of people with that project mentality, they can't let go. They want to see their project or their initiative succeed, rather than saying, you know what, didn't work. Let's try a different angle. And let's move the money to that. And then the leader has to come in and say, hey, did you move it? Did you not? And that's where we've seen the most friction, is people having that agility to fail and then move and try a different approach and not just be dogged, staying after something. We can be tenacious, and getting that out of the culture and getting more agile and accepting the failure. That's probably been one of the biggest challenges for us. The other one, if people roll this out, is realize it's tough to roll it out to 17,000 people at once, and nobody's a kind of a microcosm. They're not they don't exist alone. So we ran into problems where one group would be practicing new ways of working, and they're working with other groups that had no idea what they were talking about, and they're following old ways of doing it. And it's just we had to educate everyone in the language at least, so things could get done, and they wouldn't end up with old ways and new ways running into each other. But so look, it's not all smooth sailing, but it is well worth it. The changes we've seen in client results and in productivity it's just in crew engagement. It's been fantastic.
That's great. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. John, I know financial advice is a strategic priority for the organization, needless to say, and specifically advice that can be delivered digitally to an increasing extent. Talk a bit about how you and your team have helped deliver this to Vanguard's customers.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, Peter. If you think about Vanguard's mission, it's the best chance to provide investors the best chance for investment success. That's the mission. And often that means that we have to disrupt something or create markets globally. And often that means going direct to consumers, even if there isn't a market there. So, and technology's mission, by the way, isn't any different than the strategy of the company. It's just simply to enable that journey. So if you think about technology, let's just take cloud native platforms as an example, as a technical solution. We're in so many industry sessions talking to technologists and CTOs and CIOs. And a lot of times the question's about, hey, how do I make a case for cloud? How do I get the board? How do I get the CFO, the chairman to join me because I believe in these things. And so often we're enamored with this. Okay, it's 5 nines availability. It's the benefits of auto scale. It's developer productivity. How fast can we deploy? In fact, Vanguard's deployment frequency over the last 2 years increased 100%. Those things are wildly important, but they're not the real power of technology. The real power of technology is twofold. One is enable the strategy of the company. I had an opportunity with Tim 3 years ago, really to pitch to the board. We took 3 charts in. We said 3 charts in a dream, and we took to the board a platform, a goal. Our goal was to create a global advice platform and get the benefits of the brand and power of Vanguard and the investment in a global cloud native platform and enter new markets as nimbly as a startup. That was our goal. In the past few years, we did that. We're proving that technology, in this case, cloud native platforms, can enable strategy, not just resiliency and efficiency. And now the case for cloud is easy because we're seeing all the benefits of reuse and how nimble we can be and how we can react to what Tim said, client feedback in a really nimble way. And AI, ML are used to solve real problems. And we're doing this through new ways of working, agile, lean ways of working. So I think that's really powerful. And then the last thing I'll say is the second goal of technology goes beyond just enabling the current strategy. It's about creating optionality for the future. So we build platforms today, and the way we build platforms today is they're extensible. For example, we can share a lot of those components we've developed externally. Not saying that's part of our strategy today, but we can. We've created optionality for strategies we haven't even thought of yet. So I think that answers the question on how technology can be positioned well in the company and aligned to strategy.
That's
Peter,
great.
If I could
Please.
jump in here.
Yes, please do, Tim.
You just saw an example of the benefit of the rotation culture that we have at Vanguard. John actually led our advice group years ago. And so imagine now you marry the knowledge of a guy who led our advice group with a guy who's deep on IT and understands the technology and how to build out services. And that is the huge advantage. And then, working with me to say, hey, should we get this funded? How do we make the case to the board? He doesn't have to spend hours upon hours educating me on what the technology can do. And so you actually get to see it from his answer. You got to see it in motion right there.
That's great. I mean, I'm hearing from both of you what a luxury it is to have this partnership and some of the bonds that you've created through the shared responsibilities that you've had, but also the fact, again, that each of you have had a variety of seats that you've occupied, enriching your perspectives along the way. I appreciate you adding that.
Unfortunately for John, he's had to work with me for 22 years.
Wait a minute. Every time I've worked with him as peer, but every time we're peers, he surpasses me and I'm working for him. So
one step behind.
Love it. Always one step behind.
Well, Tim, I wanted to ask you also, I featured Vanguard in my book, Good to Great, because I was so in a couple of different areas, both on the talent side, talking about this rotational program, which I find so interesting. And we're, again, hearing a variety of places in which that has created value, but also from an innovation perspective, that yours is an organization that, despite your scale, despite the enormous presence that you are in your industry, that you continue to find ways to innovate and serve investors. And I wonder if you can reflect on how does this organization, as it has become a true behemoth, maintain its innovative culture?
Peter, we talk about this all the time. If you want to lead, you don't actually set the pace. Your pace is actually determined by the strength of your competitors and the demands of your clients. We're fortunate, we actually have some formidable competitors, and our clients are actually demanding. They're actually our owners, so we have to make sure we serve them well. And let me spend a second on that. So if you invest with Vanguard, you actually own Vanguard. So our success, how we determine our compensation, is all determined by how our clients do in our funds, by how our advice does for them, and how well we serve them. And so we are very motivated by both our mission and everything aligned with it to make sure we continue to improve for our clients. It's a great formula to have. And that success on top of it has given us scale. And so we now have the resources where we can invest more than $1 billion a year in new technologies and new services for our clients. That's how we afford the investments John's talking about in advice. Each year we'll spend a few $100 million on new advice services. That takes us from kind of that, hey, this is an interesting little online digital advice offer, to cutting edge beyond what any legacy provider can do, leveraging the best of AI and ML, et cetera, and the great data we have on client behavior. So it's a huge advantage. We also have the resources to make sure that our history is just really an advantage and not, we don't have the legacy anchor. And this is where John is huge. And my time in IT is helpful, because I know how legacy can hold you back. So John has put together a huge modernization agenda that we're well through, to go back, and whether it's refactoring, whether it's moving to the cloud, to make sure that our systems don't look like a company that's been around for more than 4 decades, but looks like what exactly you would want to architect if you built Vanguard today. And having the resources, the long-term view, really helps with that. Peter, the last element John already hit, and it's the most important to keep you motivated. And I would say for any company, and look, I've got 3 kids, and when they go out and into the workforce, my advice to them would be to find a place with purpose, a place with a motivating purpose. And John mentioned it. Hey, give investors the best chance of investment success. What does that mean? That means that we're helping people retire better, afford that house that they didn't think they could get, put their kids through college. And given our structure, we're only serving them. Everything we do is to profit them. We are not trying to, other companies, competitors are trying to make money off their retirement. We're maximizing it. And that gives people that little extra incentive, because there's nothing more motivating than meaningful work. You've heard that before, but that's what we live here.
That's really fantastic. I can't let you go, Tim, if you don't mind, one last question in the couple of minutes that we have left. As somebody who's been a CIO, serving a chairman and CEO, and now on the flip side of the table, and as I mentioned in my introduction, with, to my mind, one of the great CIOs in the United States, and John, what advice would you offer for other CIOs in terms of maybe 1 or 2 bits of advice in a moment that you would offer to them in ways to best collaborate with their CEOs?
Well, the best way to collaborate, I think that first, I always say people in their job, drink deeply in your job. Know that job cold, but then know what other people are wrestling with. It's one thing, you've got to know your discipline, but then pick your head up and make sure that you understand, see the whole field. What do? You want to drink deeply in your job, but as a leader, you must understand those business challenges. So what are you reading outside of your job? Are you spending time, and are you picking up the news, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal? What's going on in your industry? Do you care if you're an investment firm, what's going on the investment side of things? John could talk to you about, he could tell you about where rates might be going, where valuations are for investors. He could tell you about what's the latest in advice. He doesn't mean he's not deep in his discipline, because you've got to do that well, but you also should be picking your head up so you can speak other people's language. The chief information officer is one of the coolest jobs out there. It is, you get to be on the cutting edge of what technology is doing. But if you now pick your head up and learn those business challenges, those business opportunities, you can shape what a company does. You can shape where business goes, but you have to be able to do both. Just being great at your job, that's table stakes. You want to be a change agent, you've got to understand other people's. And then hopefully they do the same.
Well, wise advice, and knowing John so well, I know that he's delivering that. Well, Tim Buckley, John Marconte, thank you both so much for a really great conversation. It's been fascinating to learn from each of you, and appreciate you taking time with us today.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.